I've told this story so many times over the years that the edges between memory and nightmare have begun to blur. Sometimes, I'll wake in the middle of the night, convinced I've heard her laugh, that sharp, carefree laugh that used to echo through summer air, only to realize it's just the wind rattling the shutters. Other times, I catch my reflection in a store window, and, for half a second, it's her face I see instead of mine. That's when I know the past isn't done with me. Claire Winters isn't done with me. We met when we were 8. Two kids from opposite ends of town, me from the quiet, boring streets near the library, her from the wild, untamed edge of the woods where houses were scattered and the nights felt darker. She was trouble from the start, the kind of girl who dared you to jump off the old bridge into the creek below, who could lie to a parent without blinking, who'd talk her way into abandoned houses to see what was inside. But she was also fiercely loyal. If you were hers forever. And for some reason, I was. Years later, after high school had spit us out into the half-life of part-time jobs and half-broken dreams, we still found excuses to escape together. That summer, the summer she vanished, Claire suggested we spend a week at Hollow Lake, an old resort our grandparents used to talk about but had been closed for decades. It's still there, she said, eyes glittering like they did when she was planning trouble. Half the cabins are boarded up, but there's a caretaker who lets people rent them under the table. No tourists. No kids. Just us. The drive out was long and strange. The road narrowed the deeper we went into the pine forest, until the asphalt crumbled into gravel and then dirt. The trees pressed in from both sides, blocking out the sun, so that for long stretches it felt like driving through a tunnel carved from shadow. Every so often, we'd pass a sign, weather-worn and leaning, warning about unstable ground or dangerous currents. Claire would laugh and take a swig from the flask she kept in her jacket, like the whole world was just a dare waiting to be accepted. When we finally reached Hollow Lake, it was like stepping into a photograph that had been left too long in the sun, faded, peeling at the edges, almost unreal. The cabins were slumped under the weight of years, their roofs sagging, their porches littered with dead leaves and old beer cans. The main lodge stood crooked but defiant, its windows clouded with dust. Beyond it, the lake stretched out in a sheet of dull silver, the surface so still it looked like it had been frozen in place. I remember thinking it was beautiful in a way that made my stomach twist, the kind of beauty that hides something rotten underneath. The caretaker was a tall, thin man with eyes like cracked glass. He didn't ask our names. He just handed Claire an old brass key, told us cabin 6 was as good as any, and warned us not to go out on the lake after dark. When Claire asked why, he only smiled a small, dry stretch of lips, and said, "Things are different at night." We laughed about it later, sitting on the porch of cabin 6 with beers in our hands, watching the sun bleed into the water. But I'd be lying if I said the place didn't already have its claws in me. The air felt heavier out there, the silence deeper. And though I couldn't explain it at the time, I kept having this creeping sense that we weren't alone, that something just beyond my sight was standing very, very still, and watching. If I had known then what I know now, I'd have left that night. I'd have dragged Claire back into the car, driven until the trees opened up, and the night sky felt normal again. But I didn't. And by the end of the week, Claire Winters would be gone. It was the second night when I realized the caretaker's warning wasn't just some small-town superstition. The first night had been harmless enough, a couple of beers, cheap takeout from the only diner within 40 miles, and Claire insisting on skinny dipping despite the lake water being cold enough to make my teeth chatter. We'd gone to bed laughing, drunk and tired, with nothing stranger than a few odd creaks in the cabin walls. But the second night was different. It started with the sound of oars hitting water. I remember waking up, the room still thick with the kind of darkness that makes you doubt your outline. The lake was maybe 50 yards from the porch, and through the open window I could hear it, a slow, rhythmic dip, splash, dip, splash. I glanced at Claire's bed. Empty. For a second, I thought she'd taken the canoe out, but then I noticed her boots by the door. She wasn't the barefoot type when it came to wandering outside in the dark. I sat there for a minute, listening, my pulse gradually sinking with the steady oar strokes. Then they stopped. Just stopped. No sound of the canoe bumping the dock, no footsteps on the shore. Just silence so deep it pressed against my eardrums. I told myself I was being stupid, got a drink of water, and crawled back into bed. When I woke up in the morning, Claire was sitting at the table, hair wet, staring at something in her hands. It was an old Polaroid, edges curled and stained. I could just make out the shape of two people standing on the same dock outside our cabin. One of them looked a lot like Claire, but younger. I asked where she found it, and she said it had been slid under our door while we slept. I laughed because it sounded like the setup to a bad horror movie. She didn't laugh back. We spent most of the day hiking the trails around the lake, trying to shake off the weirdness. The forest out there had a way of making you lose your bearings. Everything looked the same, and the light filtered through the trees in shifting patterns that played tricks on your depth perception. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned, there was nothing but shadows and pine. Claire swore she saw a man standing between the trees at one point, tall and thin, wearing a hat. But when I looked, there was nothing. That evening, we headed back early, hoping to beat the cold. As we came around the bend toward the cabins, I froze. Someone had placed a line of small, flat stones leading from the dock to our cabin door, each stone marked with a single black line drawn in some kind of ink or paint. They were evenly spaced, like footsteps. Claire didn't even hesitate. She stomped right through them and kicked the last one off the porch. "Creepy locals trying to scare us," she said, grabbing 2 beers from the fridge. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just broken something, some invisible rule we didn't understand. That night, I woke again to the sound of the oars. But this time, there was something else, a low humming, almost like someone singing to themselves far out on the water. I lay still, my skin prickling, waiting for the sound to stop. Instead, it grew louder, closer, until it was right outside the cabin. And then, just as my breath caught in my throat, there came 3 slow knocks on the wall right beside my bed. The knocks didn't stop right away. They came again, slower this time, deliberate, thud, 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 each one heavy enough to make the wooden wall tremble just slightly. I sat up, my breath frosting the air in front of me. The night outside was too dark to see through the window, just a faint reflection of my pale face. I whispered Claire's name, but she didn't answer. Her bed was empty again. I grabbed the flashlight from my backpack and stepped toward the door, telling myself I'd just find her outside smoking, maybe messing with me like she used to. But when I opened it, the cold hit me like a wall, and the beam of the flashlight cut through nothing but drifting mist. The dock was there, the water beyond it flat and black, but no canoe, no Claire. And yet, I could still hear the humming. It was softer now, almost blending with the lap of water against the shore. I stepped onto the porch, scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it, a figure, tall and thin, standing just where the light began to fade into darkness. A hat brim shadowed the face, but I could tell the head was tilted slightly, watching me. My mouth went dry. "Claire?" I said, though I already knew it wasn't her. The figure didn't move. Didn't breathe, as far as I could tell. Just stood there like part of the scenery, until the flashlight flickered, and in that split second of darkness, it was gone. I backed inside and locked the door, heart slamming in my chest. Claire came in through the back door minutes later, dripping wet, her hair hanging in strings. She didn't say where she'd been. Just went straight to her bed and lay down, fully clothed, her eyes wide open in the dark. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, the caretaker was waiting on the porch. His eyes were sharper than before, the pale blue of chipped porcelain. He asked if we'd been out on the lake at night. Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What's it to you?" she said. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Some places keep what they're given," he said, voice low. "And the lake's been given enough." Then he walked away. We spent the day avoiding each other, each lost in our heads. I thought about the stones on the path, the Polaroid, the man in the trees. None of it made sense, but the pattern felt deliberate, like pieces of a puzzle that were only just starting to take shape. Claire seemed jumpy, too, constantly glancing at the water as if expecting something to rise from it. At one point, I caught her holding the Polaroid again, tracing the edges with her thumb like it was something precious. That evening, just before sunset, we decided to walk the shoreline. The air was still, the water reflecting the orange and gold sky so perfectly it looked like glass. We were halfway to the far end of the lake when Claire stopped dead. There, propped up on a rotting log, was another Polaroid, this one of me, asleep in my bed the night before. My stomach turned to ice. We ran back to the cabin without speaking, slammed the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. That night, neither of us slept. Every creak of the cabin walls, every groan of the wind felt like footsteps creeping closer. Around 3 a.m., I heard Claire whisper something in the dark, "He's not going to stop now." I didn't plan to fall asleep that night, but exhaustion has a way of taking you when fear can't hold the line anymore. One moment, I was staring at the shadows crawling along the ceiling. The next, I woke to the sound of the back door creaking open. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw Claire slipping outside, barefoot this time, her nightshirt clinging damp to her skin. "Claire," I hissed, but she didn't even glance back. The air that rushed in was cold enough to sting my face. I grabbed the flashlight and followed, the beam swaying with every step. She was moving toward the dock, slow and steady, like she was sleepwalking. The water beyond was black, the kind of black that swallows the light whole. By the time I reached the dock, she was standing at the very edge, her toes curling over the wet wood. "Claire, come back inside," I said, my voice shaking. She didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. And then she started humming. It was the same low, eerie hum I'd heard out on the lake 2 nights before. I stepped closer, reaching out to grab her arm, but she turned sharply and looked at me, and I swear to God her eyes weren't her own. They were too dark, the pupils swallowing the color, reflecting the faintest shimmer of the lake. She smiled faintly, like she was about to tell me a secret, and whispered, "I can see them now." Before I could ask what she meant, the water behind her rippled. Not like something breaking the surface, more like something just beneath it, circling. My flashlight beam caught the faintest outline, long, pale shapes, moving unnaturally smooth. The air smelled wrong, damp and metallic, like wet iron. I lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. Her skin was ice cold. "We're going inside," I said, but she didn't fight me. She let me pull her back a step, and then, without warning, she yanked free and stepped backward into the water. There was no splash. None. She just went under, like the lake had opened its mouth and swallowed her whole. The water closed over her without a ripple. I dropped to my knees, screaming her name, the flashlight rolling off the dock and clattering into the shallows. My hands plunged into the water, grasping at nothing but mud and weeds. I dove in, the cold hitting me like a punch to the chest, and swam blindly into the darkness. It was deeper than it should have been, the bottom falling away into black nothing. And then I felt it, something brushing against my leg. Smooth. Strong. Moving past me fast enough to stir the water around my body. I broke the surface, gasping, but there was no sign of Claire. No ripples, no bubbles, nothing. Just the flat, silver-black sheet of the lake, utterly still. I scrambled back onto the dock, choking on air, my chest burning. The cabins were dark. The trees loomed silent. I don't remember running back to the caretaker's lodge, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was pounding on his door with both fists, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. When he finally opened it, his face didn't show surprise. Only resignation. "She's gone, isn't she?" he said quietly. I nodded, shivering. He looked past me toward the lake and sighed. "I told you not to go out at night." Then he shut the door.
By the way, if you're into strange and unbelievable true stories like this one, make sure to subscribe. We drop a new story every single day, and trust me, they only get wilder from here. Now, back to it.
The next morning, the lake looked different. Calm, yes, but in a way that felt staged, like it was pretending to be harmless. The mist clung low to the surface, refusing to lift even when the sun climbed above the trees. I sat on the porch of cabin 6, wrapped in a blanket, numb. My hands still smelled faintly of the lake, that strange metallic tang that soap couldn't wash away. By mid-morning, 2 police cruisers and a rescue truck pulled up, their tires crunching over the gravel. The caretaker must have called them, though I never saw him do it. 2 officers started asking me questions right away, when I'd last seen Claire, what she was wearing, and if she had a history of running away. I told them everything, except for the part about the humming, the man in the trees, and her eyes that night. I could already see the disbelief creeping into their faces. Within an hour, divers were in the water. I stood on the dock, hugging myself, watching their black wetsuits vanish beneath the surface. The lake swallowed them, too, but at least they came back up. After the 3rd dive, one of them clambered onto the dock, pulling off his mask with a grim look. "It's deeper than it should be," he muttered to the other diver. "Way deeper." When I asked what he meant, he shook his head and said nothing. By the afternoon, they'd found no trace of her, no clothes, no footprints on the muddy bottom, nothing. One of the officers suggested she might have swum to the far side of the lake and walked off. The caretaker laughed at that, a dry, humorless sound, and said, "Nobody makes it to the other side." It was around then that they found the first thing. A deputy was walking the shoreline when he spotted something wedged between 2 rocks, a Polaroid. I didn't have to see it to know what it would be. When they showed it to me, my stomach turned. It was a picture of Claire standing on the dock, but it wasn't from the night before. She looked younger, maybe 17, and she was wearing a dress I knew she'd thrown away years ago. Behind her, in the far corner of the frame, was the same tall, thin figure I'd seen in the trees. The officers chalked it up to a weird coincidence, but I could see the unease in their eyes. The caretaker stayed silent, leaning against a post with his arms crossed, like none of this was news to him. As the day dragged on, the search widened. They brought in dogs, but the animals refused to go near the water, barking and whining until their handlers led them away. The sun dipped lower, painting the lake in gold that quickly bled into rust red. The mist never left. That night, they set up temporary floodlights along the shore. The beams cut sharp lines across the water, making it look even blacker by contrast. I stood there for hours, scanning for any movement. At one point, I thought I saw something, a ripple far out in the center, just a small disturbance. I called one of the divers over, but when he shone his light on it, there was nothing. Just flat water again. Around midnight, the police packed up for the night, promising to resume in the morning. I was the last one on the dock, unable to bring myself to go inside. That's when I heard it again, the humming. Soft, almost too soft to notice at first. It came from far out on the water, but it was moving closer. And then I saw it, a single canoe, drifting toward shore without anyone paddling. Its bow nudged the dock gently, rocking in the still water. Inside, resting neatly in the center, was another Polaroid, this one of me, standing on that very dock, staring out at the lake. It was the 3rd night after Claire vanished. By then, the police presence had thinned, just one patrol car that did lazy loops around the cabins every few hours, its headlights sweeping briefly over the dock before disappearing again. The caretaker still watched me from a distance, but he hadn't said a word since the day she went under. The lake was quiet. Too quiet. Even the frogs and crickets had fallen silent. I was sitting in the cabin's small kitchen, staring at the latest Polaroid, the one of me on the dock, when I heard it. A faint tapping on the glass of the front window. Not knocking, exactly, but a soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap. My first thought was wind-blown branches, except there were no trees close enough for that. The tapping came again, louder this time. I stood slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to look. But I did. She was there. Claire. Standing just outside the window, her hair plastered to her face, her clothes soaked through. She wasn't shivering, though the night air was cold enough to bite. Her eyes locked on mine, unblinking, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. I rushed to the door, fumbling with the lock, and yanked it open. She stepped inside without hesitation, water pooling at her feet. Claire. I grabbed her shoulders, expecting her to collapse into me, to tell me where she'd been. Instead, she just stared, head tilting slightly, like she was studying my face for the first time. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice breaking. She blinked once, slowly. "I was here," she said finally, her voice flat, unfamiliar. "You just didn't see me." I didn't know what to say to that. She moved past me into the cabin, dripping onto the wooden floor, and sat down at the table. She began tracing circles in the condensation on the surface with one pale finger. The silence between us was unbearable. "You were under the water," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw you go under." Her gaze lifted, and I swear for a moment her pupils shifted, becoming just a fraction too large. "It's not water," she whispered. "Not really." Before I could ask what she meant, she reached into her pocket and slid something across the table toward me. Another Polaroid. This one made my stomach turn cold. It was a picture of the two of us, not as we were now, but as children, standing on a dock I didn't recognize. In the background, half hidden in the trees, was that same tall, thin man. I demanded to know who had taken it. Claire only smiled, a small, distant smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's been waiting," she said softly. The caretaker appeared in the doorway not long after, as if he'd known she was here. His expression was unreadable. "You can't keep her here," he said to me. "Not like this." I told him to get out, that she needed rest, but when I turned back to her, the chair was empty. The floor where she'd been sitting was dry. No wet footprints, no trace she'd ever been there. I tore through the cabin, calling her name, checked outside, and ran to the dock. Nothing. The lake stared back at me, perfectly still, reflecting the thin crescent of the moon. And then I heard it again, the humming, this time coming from directly beneath the dock. I didn't sleep after that. Couldn't. I sat in the cabin with the flashlight in my lap, every muscle in my body wound tight, listening for the next sound. Around 3 in the morning, the caretaker knocked on the door. Not a polite knock, 3 sharp raps that rattled the hinges. I opened it, ready to tell him to leave me alone, but his expression stopped me cold. "You need to see something," he said. I followed him down to the shoreline, the cold air biting at my face. The moon was low, a pale sickle hanging over the lake. The water was still, but the mist was thicker than I'd ever seen it, rolling in slow waves that seemed almost deliberate. We stopped at the end of the dock. The caretaker didn't speak right away. He just stared at the water like he was waiting for it to move. Then, without looking at me, he said, "This lake isn't as deep in the way you think. It's deep in the way a doorway is deep." I frowned, thinking it was some local superstition. But he kept talking. "They come for what's left behind. For what they're promised. People go missing here, but they don't drown. They're taken. And if they come back, they're not the same." I wanted to laugh, to call him insane, but the memory of Claire's eyes, too dark, too wide, stopped me. "What are they?" I asked. He shook his head. "Don't call them anything. Names are invitations." His voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking. "You saw her, didn't you? After she was gone?" I nodded slowly. "Then you've got one chance," he said, turning to face me fully. "If she comes again, you don't touch her. Don't let her touch you. And whatever she says, don't follow her." Before I could ask why, he stepped off the dock into a small rowboat tied there. "You should leave in the morning," he said. "If you can." Then he rode into the mist until he disappeared completely. I stood there a long time, staring into the water. At first, it was just my reflection staring back, pale, exhausted, hollow-eyed. But then another face appeared beside mine. Claire's. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, her expression urgent. I dropped to my knees, leaning over the edge, trying to read her lips. She looked over her shoulder, then back at me, mouthing the same phrase again and again. I think she was saying, "Don't let them in." The water rippled violently, distorting her face, and then something else began to surface, as pale, human-like hands pressing up from beneath, fingers splayed wide. They weren't Claire's. They were too long, too thin, and the joints bent wrong. I stumbled back, nearly falling onto the dock. The water stilled instantly, my reflection the only thing left staring up at me. But I swear I could still feel those fingers brushing against the underside of the boards where I stood. When I returned to the cabin, another Polaroid was waiting on the porch. This one froze my blood. It was me, kneeling on the dock just minutes earlier, and behind me, rising from the mist, was the shape of someone tall and thin, watching. I left at sunrise. I didn't pack much, just threw my bag into the back seat and drove until the mist was behind me. For hours, the road stayed empty. No trucks, no towns, just endless pine trees pressing in from both sides. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone walking down the center of the road. When I finally reached the nearest gas station, I went straight to the payphone outside and called my brother. My voice shook as I told him I was coming home. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I thought you were already here. You called me last night." I hung up without responding. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I knew I hadn't called him. I tried to shake it off, blaming stress, exhaustion, maybe even hallucination. But when I went inside to pay for gas, the clerk, a woman in her 60s with a heavy drawl, paused halfway through counting my change. She looked at me like she was trying to remember something. "You were here yesterday," she said. "You asked for directions back to the lake." I didn't argue. I just left, got back in the car, and drove. The sense of being followed never left me. At one point, passing through a small stretch of road where the fog had gathered low to the ground, I swear I saw a figure standing among the trees, tall, thin, still. Watching. By the time I made it home, night had fallen. I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and finally let myself believe it was over. I even started unpacking, telling myself I'd throw away the Polaroids and try to forget. That's when I saw it. Sitting on my kitchen table. Another Polaroid. This one wasn't of the lake, or the dock, or even of me. It was my house. Taken from outside, through the kitchen window. The timestamp at the bottom read 3:07 a.m., a time that hadn't happened yet. Somewhere outside, in the dark, something tapped on the glass. 3 sharp raps. And then, silence.
But something about this story doesn't feel finished. What do you think happened? Leave your theory in the comments. And if this story gave you chills, wait until tomorrow. Because every single day, we uncover real stories darker than fiction. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more.